Welcome, everybody. It's now afternoon, so welcome to Friday afternoon. You can think of no better place to be than the Jenkins and Mac program of lifelong learning, and you chose wisely, as they say. Today, we're very fortunate to have Brad Kirkman with us. I'm not going to give Brad a long introduction. Probably a lot of you know him, but he's going to introduce himself anyway in this area. But Brad is faculty member here at Poole. He's part of the Department of Management, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship. He does a lot of research in that area, and he's published books. So therefore, you got to be an expert, Brad. So with that, I will turn the floor over to you. But if I can go before I do that, let me go one more slide, Jessica. And I just want to do a commercial for the Lifelong Learning Summit on September 22nd. Hope you have that on your calendar. If not, shame on you, but please get it on your calendar. We're looking forward for an exciting day. Again, we have a whole series of people coming to speak that are going to talk about topics that you probably haven't seen before. So, and of course, we have that all important ethics bookend on the back end for those people that need that. It does count as CPE overall. So we look forward to having you join us. I'm sure we're bombarding you with our messages at this point. So just go on and sign up. So as far as today, this is a CPE granting activity. Make sure you get your first and last name. That way Jessica knows who you are when she's looking to assign you CPE. There are 3 polling questions, okay? Please answer those. If you're having issues with that, please put something in chat as well. At the very end, Jessica's going to come back on and we're going to put a survey link. That survey link is very important. That's part of our NASBA requirement to get that from you. And so please complete all that. You need to do all that to get your CPE. And if you have any questions throughout all this, feel free to drop a message to Jessica. So with that, I'm going to shut up and turn it over to you, Brad.
All right. Thanks, Scott. And I appreciate you and Jessica inviting me to be at this meeting today. And I appreciate everyone being here and sharing your lunch hour with me, talking about, I think, a topic that everybody is probably interested in, and it certainly affected everybody for especially the last 3 years, managing hybrid and remote teams. So we'll talk about some best practices for those. And I should tell you a little bit about me. There's my title. It's long and obnoxious. And one of the weird things about it is I'm neither a general nor am I retired. So that confuses people right off the bat. But, academia is one of those weird places where we put someone else's name in the professor's title. We have the Bank of America professor in our college. My professorship just happens to be named for an individual person, General Hugh Shelton, who basically served as the 14th chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff from 1987 to 2001. He was raised in a very, very small town out east in North Carolina called Speed. He's an NC State graduate, of course, majored in textile engineering. He has a biography, if you like biographies, stories about leaders. Basically his life story in this book called Without Hesitation, which is a fantastic read, knighted by the Queen in 2001. And we have something here at NC State called the Shelton Leadership Center that is named obviously for him. And it does a variety of things, but one of the most important things it does, every summer, we bring in high school students from all over the state of North Carolina to participate in a week-long leadership development program. So the students live here on campus. They are in the dorms, they're working in teams, learning about leadership. And while they're here, they learn General Shelton's 5 principles of values-based leadership: honesty, integrity, compassion, diversity, and selfless service. It's a very impactful program. If you have kids nearing that age, or you have friends with kids nearing that kind of high school age, I highly recommend you check out the Shelton Leadership Challenge, which is what that program is called. And to be able to get kids between that 14 to 17-year-old age range to start thinking about leadership, who they want to be as leaders, how they want to lead, and what arenas they want to lead in, I think is really, really important. I spoke at one of their graduations a couple of years ago. The kids get up and give testimonials about the week they've been through. Most of them are in tears, talking about how impactful the program is. So again, a phenomenal opportunity. I'm also a North Carolina native. I grew up in Greensboro, so to have my professorship associated with a great leader like General Shelton's been a real honor for me. I also most recently was at Texas A&M University before I got back to the state of North Carolina. My PhD is from a school located close by. In the spirit of full disclosure, I also have an undergraduate degree from that institution. So 8 years of brainwashing. But as you can see, I can proudly wear the NC State stuff. I typically like the black shirt with a little bit of red on it. Too much red can be a little overwhelming for me. But again, I'm very, very happy to be back in the state at a great institution like NC State. Worked at a place called the Center for Creative Leadership for about 10 years in terms of leadership development stuff. Those are my areas of research and consulting. I've done some visiting professorships, and I only teach really in our MBA and executive education program. So again, a little bit about me and General Shelton. Most of what I'm going to talk about in this short time we have together comes from a book that we published in February. It's a popular press practitioner book called Unbreakable. And that's my co-author, Adam Stoverink. Adam was my PhD student when I was at Texas A&M. He's now an associate professor at University of Arkansas. And we decided to write a book about what makes teams resilient. Like, how do teams bounce back from adversity to go on to greater levels of success? We know a lot about what makes individual people resilient. We've had 50 years of research on why some people bounce back faster than others when they're faced with adversity. And it's things like a sense of optimism, self-confidence, self-esteem. So we know a lot about that. What we didn't know a lot about is what makes teams collectively resilient. Is it just a matter of taking a bunch of resilient individuals, throwing them into a team, and standing back and watching the team resilience magic happen? Or is it something else? And it turns out it's something else. Good thing for us, because we wouldn't have had a book if it was just the former. So we ended up dedicating the book to all the frontline workers and first responders that were so incredible to all of us during COVID. What's interesting about those teams is that they were also going through this trauma that we were all going through, COVID, but they were also out there helping us get through it as well. So we saw those teams sort of demonstrate extreme resilience in the face of this unimaginable trauma. We knew we had to get this book out there and dedicate it to them. So that what you'll see today is mostly kind of coming from that particular book. Some of the good news about the book, Forbes magazine just named it the #1 best team leadership read for 2023, which we're very excited about. And then Inc. magazine also named it one of the better books for helping to build your leadership to be more resilient, teams to be more resilient. So we're very pleased about that. I think one of the reasons the book has resonated with so many people, again, is because resilience is such a hot topic. It's hard to watch anything on TV, anything on social media, any sporting event without hearing the word resilience. In fact, Harvard Business Review last year asked their readers what the #1 business concept was for them. And it turns out the word resilience, that was the #1 choice of the readers of HBR. And then McKinsey came out with a sort of a report earlier this year that talked about the 6 most important priorities for CEOs in the turbulent times we're in. And #1 was resilience. So again, this topic of how can individuals and teams overcome adversity is really, really important. So today, again, we're kind of focusing a little bit more on remote and hybrid teams. And if I have time at the end, we'll talk some about generational differences, how those kind of play into working in these kind of this new environment we're in. So I've actually been studying what we call virtual teams. People don't like that term anymore because they think it's a bunch of avatars that running around. They're not really real. So we changed the term to remote teams. But I've been studying virtual teams since the late 90s because companies were using them as far back as the late 90s. And there were 3 companies that really let us do super deep dives in terms of understanding virtual teams. You guys all probably know what Cisco is. Alcoa is the aluminum company. And Sabre is a travel reservations company. It spun off from American Airlines. It's now its own travel reservations organization. So we spent a lot of time with these organizations trying to figure out how to make virtual teams function well. And one of the things we did while we were at Cisco, we interviewed a bunch of team members and team leaders, and we asked a very simple question. What attributes or characteristics would a leader have to be a successful remote team leader? So what types of things would that person have to possess to be a successful remote or virtual team leader? And they gave us a lot of information. This is just a partial list of what they said. In fact, I'll just let you read these to yourself, but they call their remote leaders project managers or PMs at Cisco. So this is all quotes that we took from our interviews. And again, only a partial list. Anybody out of breath, even though you're not talking? Yeah, this is overwhelming. In fact, I have another word for this list of characteristics. Yeah, that's what I call it. Good luck with that. So lesson number one for today's talk is, if you're a remote team leader, a virtual team leader, and you think you're going to be the sole source of leadership for your team, you are sadly mistaken. It's not going to work. You're going to burn out. It's too challenging. It's too overwhelming for you, one person, to provide all the leadership your remote teams need. You're going to have to be, and I always say, if you're a dictator or a micromanager, you should not be a remote team leader. It's not the job for you. There are other jobs that dictators and micromanagers are probably better at. Remote team leadership is not for you, because if you can't delegate and empower the people in your team, again, you're going to burn out and you're going to not be successful as a remote team leader. So remember, one thing for sure is you have to learn how to delegate and empower to be a successful remote team leader. Now, so that's something we learned, say, in the last couple of decades, but here are some things that we learned just in the last 3 years about working remotely. And I want to do this in the form of myths versus facts. So when I go over each of these, and there are 10 of them, in the chat, I want you to put the word myth or fact, depending on what you think it is. If you think it's a myth, write the word myth in the chat. If you think it's a fact, put fact in the chat. Now just keep kind of a running total of what I'm seeing in terms of what you're reporting out. So let's do the first one. The first one says, teams in companies that have camera on policies for remote meetings have higher team member engagement and participation. Myth or fact? I see a lot of myths. I see some facts in there too. In fact, looks to be about half and half, I think. So that one is actually a myth. But why is it a myth? Well, we have some evidence that have shown that the more on-camera Zoom meetings people have in a particular day, the more likely they are to report increased mental fatigue, which is in turn related to less engagement and participation in meetings. So it's actually the opposite. It's the reverse. People actually report feeling less engaged, and they participate even less when they're on camera all day long. So what do we do about that? Well, we would suggest you try to create a camera schedule and only use cameras for meetings that require a high degree of two-way communication rather than one-way. So if you're just having a meeting and wanting to give information to your team members and it's not really a two-way conversation, turn the cameras off. If it's a situation where you want to have a lot of interaction and back and forth, keep the cameras on. Number two, camera on policies create more fatigue for women compared to men. Myth or fact? Almost all facts. Interesting. So that is, in fact, a fact. Women do feel, and why is that? Women do feel more pressure to engage in effective self-presentation. They're also more likely to direct attention internally rather than externally when viewing themselves on live video. Camera use also requires a certain level of personal appearance, right? You're on camera. And women are subject to exactly what you're saying there, Sasha. Yep. Women are subject to the grooming gap, such that there's just greater pressure on women to have the right attire and appearance compared to men. And women, particularly those that are mothers, are also at a higher risk of having family members walk into virtual calls. Some logistical reasons why that also exists. So we're seeing this effect is true for everyone, but it's actually stronger for women compared to men. So number three, camera on use is more fatiguing for those that have been in their companies longer compared to newcomers. So this says that that effect will be stronger for those that have been there longer compared to newbies. Myth or fact? I'm seeing a little bit of both, actually. All right, looks about 50-50. That one is in fact a myth. Why is it a myth? Well, people who have been there longer have had more time to create and refine their organizational image compared to newer employees. Being in the company longer gives them more leeway in terms of their behavior and what they can do. Newer employees are still trying to establish their professional image, so there's more pressure on them to have just the right appearance when they're on camera, say the right thing, look the right way. So again, that one's a myth. Number 4, when having a camera on meeting, to maintain a sense of equality, you should keep everyone's image, including your own, the same size, kind of like the Brady Bunch setup on the screens. We're trying to maintain a sense of equality. Let's not have one person's picture or image be bigger than the other one's. Myth or fact? See a little bit of both there, actually. Maybe a little bit more myth than fact. That one is in fact a myth. It turns out that watching yourself on camera can be very distracting and causes people to hold back their true thoughts and feelings because they're more critical of themselves. This is a research that came out of Stanford University in what's called their virtual human interaction lab. And I always say it's kind of like I'm standing up in front of a classroom teaching. It's almost like someone comes into the room with a full-length mirror and holds it in front of me as I teach. And I'm trying to teach, but I got this, I'm looking at myself in the mirror and I'm like stuff on my shirt, and I'm looking at my hair, and I'm just getting really distracted by looking at myself rather than really interfacing with the class. So again, watching yourself can be very distracted. So what we recommend now is that you try either minimizing your own video to a smaller level, or Zoom has a new option. I think they figured this out, probably from some of this research, called the hide self view. There's now a hide self view in Zoom that takes you completely off the screen. Ever since I saw this study, I have used the hide self view in Zoom. It changed my life. I am no longer worried about what I look like, what I'm doing, how stupid I look. I'm just focused on what I'm doing and what I'm delivering. So again, I highly recommend that hide self view. You'll be less fatigued and less distracted when you're on camera, when you're on Zoom. Number 5, we hear a lot about this one. This says team creativity and innovation are much more difficult to achieve working remotely than face-to-face. This seems to be a prevailing thing out there, right? A lot of CEOs say this when they want everybody to come back to work. They'll say you can't be creative and you can't be innovative working remotely versus face-to-face. Well, you're saying lots of myth there. Good for you, because that is a myth. What do we know from the research? Well, we know that face-to-face team dynamics tend to actually reduce team creativity and innovation because some people shut down and others will tend to jump in and dominate the discussion. And they've also learned, it's kind of a psychological thing, that people tend to conform more when they're face-to-face. They tend to go along with whatever's being talked about when they're face-to-face versus virtual. And you don't want that when it comes to creativity and innovation. The other thing we know, at least until now, only one person can speak at a time in a Zoom or kind of this kind of environment, which means that you have to actually shut up and listen to others as they're talking about their points of view and consider everyone's ideas, which is very good for creativity. We also know that team members should actually brainstorm first and then on their own, and then bring their ideas to the team to maximize the number and quality of ideas. Oftentimes we get together in a team and we'll go, what do you guys think about this? Let's brainstorm. And it's like crickets. So actually have people brainstorm on their own first and then bring their ideas and then talk about them in the team meeting. That actually works better for creativity and innovation. Number 6, in remote meetings, when discussing particularly sensitive subjects, anonymous polling is a better choice than the hand raise or green check mark for yes, red X for no feature to get a sense of what your team members really think. Myth or fact? That one is indeed a fact. You are all over that. So anonymous polls typically allow people to express their honest opinions without being fear of being ostracized or singled out. The other thing we've learned in Zoom and using these type of media, breakout rooms can be really helpful. And people in smaller kind of groups can vet their opinions and ideas before discussing with the whole team. So if you actually have a larger team or group, it's very helpful to get people to talk about things in breakout teams, then come back and discuss with their larger teams. I do this with my MBA students. When we have cases in the classroom, I'll have them talk about the case in small groups first. Then we talk about it as an overall class, and they build some confidence in their ideas. Number 7, For globally remote teams with members in different time zones, you should rotate the start time of the meetings to make sure you're creating fairness by inconveniencing the same people every time. Myth or fact? That one is indeed a fact. So not starting every meeting on headquarters time. That's something Cisco did. Cisco would start every meeting, the remote meeting they had based on, San Jose time, Pacific time. And it kind of sent signals to people that they weren't really valued. Like, you have to be up at midnight or 2 o'clock in the morning, but I don't. And so kind of rotating those meetings can be helpful, create more respect, and make sure you're showing that you value people's time, right? Not having the same people inconvenienced every time. Number 8, leaders empowering their teams, giving their teams more autonomy, discretion, is more important for teams that are face-to-face compared to those that are remote. So this says empowerment is more important for face-to-face teams versus those that are remote. Myth or fact? You guys are all over this one. That is, in fact, a myth. I've done this research myself, and we found repeatedly that team empowerment has actually stronger effects on team performance for remote teams compared to face-to-face teams. Well, why is that? Well, if you're not in the office and you don't have access to the boss consistently, then you're going to have to make decisions on your own and act on the fly, because you can't constantly, consult the boss and say, is this okay? Is that okay? You're having to make decisions without a lot of consultation with the boss. So that's why it's more important to empower your remote team members than face-to-face. Now, the evidence would show you should empower all your teams because it is associated with more team performance, but you want to make sure you pay special attention to empowering your remote teams. That is critical. So that's what you should do. Number 9 talks about what you actually do. So this says leaders typically empower their remote team members less than their face-to-face team members. Think that's a myth or a fact? I see a lot of facts. See some myths in there too. That's actually a fact, and that's a problem, because in the previous slide we said they should empower them more, but on this slide we're saying they actually in the real world they empower them less. And why do they empower them less? Well, they struggle with people they can't see. They're not sure they're working. They feel a loss of control because they're not in constant contact with their members. And as we all know, 3 years into COVID, it takes more time to coach remote members through their challenges, right? When you're face-to-face, you can bump into people, you can pop in the office, see them in the hallway. When it's remote, it takes more time and energy and effort, which is why people do it probably less. So the recommendation here is to make sure leaders know that they're probably biased against empowering their remote team members, and make sure that they know there's a business case for doing it, because if they're left to their own devices, they're probably not going to do it. Finally, number 10, team collaboration decreases when members work in a hybrid environment compared to when they work face-to-face. So here we're comparing hybrid, which is a mix of face-to-face and remote, and face-to-face. And this suggests that team collaboration decreases when members work in a hybrid environment. Myth or fact? Lots and lots and lots of myths out there. That is, in fact, a myth. In fact, a survey came out in 2021, a hybrid work employee survey, found that hybrid employees actually have higher levels of agility, psychological safety, team equity, and intentionality that compared to on-site employees. And those are all critical components of team collaboration. So we recommend that if you're using the hybrid format, make sure you have adequate collaboration and sort of coordination tools and technology that enables effective teamwork. Great job on those. Some other things we learned about hybrid work. Some weird stuff about productivity during and after COVID-19. So one thing we saw, because we measure productivity, is that productivity actually went way up in the second quarter of 2020 as offices closed down and employees switched to work from home. So there were a lot of challenges with regard to working from home, but productivity appeared not to be one of them. Productivity actually went up in the first quarter and stayed pretty high through 2021. The problem is productivity actually dropped sharply in early 2022 as a response to return to the office. So I think in this case, it's saying for productivity people had more difficulty shifting back to the office than they did shifting to work from home. So I'm waiting on some numbers for 2023 in terms of where productivity is now, but we can see there have been some challenges in the way people are productive shifting back to the office. So we're going to keep an eye on that. And then also, what do we know recently about hybrid work? So I've got a slide on the good and a slide on the bad. So here's the good news about hybrid work. One, employees who work remotely at least once per month are 24% more likely to feel happy and productive in their roles than those that don't. Over half of employees report reduced stress levels when they work in a hybrid fashion. Over 2/3 of workers believe that hybrid working has improved their physical fitness. That makes sense. They probably got more time to devote, more flexibility to devote to staying physically fit. Almost 3/4 of employees report that hybrid work arrangements have improved their family relationships. Very interesting from a family standpoint. People are saying working in a hybrid arrangement has improved their family relationships. Again, almost 3/4 or over 3/4 have saved money through hybrid work. I'm guessing that has a lot to do with commuting costs and maybe clothing too, right? If you're working at home, maybe you don't invest so much in some of the work attire. 82% of employees reported that the ability to do hybrid work has made them happier and more motivated. So again, kind of a repeated pattern here. Almost 2/3 of employees agree that the ability to work remotely influences their decision to stay or leave a job. That is critical. People are making decisions about whether to stay at their job or leave based on the opportunity for hybrid work. And then lastly, over half of employees desire to work remotely at least 3 days per week. So that's some of the good news about hybrid work. But as with all things in life, there are also some drawbacks and some things that are not as great. What are those? So over half believe that office workers will experience greater career advancement than remote workers. So this notion of out of sight, out of mind, right? If you're working remotely, are you going to get noticed? Is the boss going to see what you do? Are you going to get promotion opportunities versus those that are in the office? So there's this fear that people in the office will get greater career advancement. More than 1/3 of hybrid employees cite knowing when and why to come into their office as the greatest challenge. And I think when we first started experimenting with hybrid, people would go in on a Wednesday to work with their fellow team members, and nobody on their team was in on Wednesday. They were there on Tuesday or Thursday. So people got really confused about when and why to come to their office is a big challenge. According to almost half of leaders of teams, relationship building is the greatest challenge in hybrid or remote work. Probably not surprising that it takes a little bit more effort to build high quality relationships when people are working remote and hybrid. A survey from Microsoft suggested that over half of hybrid workers reported that communication with their team had become more difficult since the shift to hybrid work. Again, that makes sense because when you're in the office, communication is easy. When you're out of the office, it takes more effort. A survey by PwC found that over half of those who worked in a hybrid model felt it was more difficult to collaborate with coworkers than when they were all in the office together. Now, whether that's backed up by the evidence, we've seen some evidence against that, but that's how people are feeling, right? So that's going to affect their behavior as well. According to a study conducted by Buffer, about 1/5 of remote workers felt lonely and disconnected from their team, which again could be made worse by the hybrid model. About 22% of remote workers struggle with work-life balance, which could also be exacerbated in a hybrid situation where individuals feel pressure to be at home, but also at work. Gen Z and millennial employees, we'll talk about these folks in a second, working a lot from home feel like they're missing out on vital mentorship, coaching, and socialization. So the more recent generations are feeling like they're not getting as much coaching as they desire in these situations. So what do we do about all this? What are some best practices for managing hybrid work and also hybrid meetings? So hybrid work, what do we do about it? One, we just have to have new mentoring and coaching models. If we're not going to be face-to-face as much, we've got to develop virtual onboarding and networking opportunities for coaching and mentoring. There's no way around it. If you're remote or hybrid, you've got to learn how to do that. It's not as natural for some people as face-to-face. Establish virtual communities of practice. These are kind of groups of people that get together voluntarily to talk about innovation and new ways to do things in your organization. You've got plenty of tools for that. Build in some digital bonding time. We had a lot of that, especially early parts of COVID. So non-work virtual events, happy hours, competitions, scavenger hunts. There's a ton of different things we could do now virtually. Identify opportunities to be in person. So if you're going to be in person, what would you do with that in-person time? So meetings with senior leaders, special events, training opportunities would be important to have. Create space and time for informal digital connections. So we said in the office, you have a lot of informal interactions because you just bump into people. In a virtual environment, you don't have that. So you need to figure out ways to leverage technology for informal digital connections. Encouraging digital lingering, which sounds a bit strange, but most of us, when we have a meeting, we'll hang out after the meeting and just have informal chats after the meeting is over. And that's something we tend not to do in a virtual environment. And we're losing out on that after meeting interaction. So this suggests that you could do this with breakout rooms or other technology to encourage that kind of hanging out after the meeting. A lot of stuff that's important happens after the meeting anyway. So having that is important. Again, digital tools to build and reinforce culture. Breakout rooms, we've talked about the importance of that. Has anybody ever noticed that you wave at the end of Zoom meetings? What is that about? Why are we doing that? That's kind of silly. But like we're kind of wrapping up the meeting, we're like, bye, bye. It's like, how did that start? But it turns out that in a virtual world, you do need to overemphasize the social cues that you're sending. So I notice myself doing a lot of head nodding because I can't speak when somebody else is speaking. So I can't say, yeah, I agree. I have to sort of do it through a nonverbal kind of way. So head nodding and smiling and showing my agreement without speaking is going to be important. So we're trying to teach people that it's okay to overperform on social cues. People are going to feel, especially the ones that are more remote, are going to feel like maybe they might be overlooked. So we've got to establish equity, fairness for employees that are remote, hybrid, and in person. Make sure you got transparent guidelines for how you promote, will give raises. So people can see clearly how they're going to get these things no matter what, sort of format they're working in. Challenge in-group, out-group thinking. A lot of times you'll see people who are not in the office form a group, and those that are in the office form a group, and they can be kind of combative towards each other. So we're talking about mixing up teams and leaders in different locations, making sure that doesn't happen. And then make sure you foster initiative taking among your team members. Don't let that out of sight, out of mind stuff kind of come in. So different kind of ways to do that. By the way, I meant to say at the very beginning, we're going to give you copies of these slides because I know there's a lot of information coming at you. And so I want you to have this stuff as kind of a reference tool that you can use at work. So rest assured, you're going to get everything you see here on these slides at the end. So don't panic. Now, we said ways to enhance hybrid meetings is also important. So the former was hybrid working. This is hybrid meetings. How do you make hybrid meetings more effective and efficient? Certainly notify everybody in your team about the objectives for the meetings, especially those folks that are remote. Make sure they know what the meeting's about, what they're there for. Be very consistent about posting information about decisions on your hybrid team's message board so nothing falls through the cracks. There's lots of good technology for that. Remote team members can use those spaces to post questions that they might be able to have answered asynchronously, right? Not in the meeting, maybe between meetings. Share those important goals in advance so people will feel ready to contribute and feel safe to do so. Recording team meeting, going to be critical. Not everybody can attend, so they want to be able to see what happened in the meeting. This is one I thought was kind of strange, but I do think it works. Arrange people who are physically present in a semicircle facing the screen to foster feelings of inclusion and safety with remote team members. A little bit of a psychological trick there, but that seems to physically work for making sure everyone feels included and part of the meeting. And then some people have said remote team members in hybrid meetings get ignored. So they've almost gone the opposite direction and they're focusing more on the remote members and they're forgetting about their physically present team members. So just make sure and strive for a balance in terms of focus on those that are remote and those that are physically present. And then you want to rotate the roles that people have in these meetings, especially those that are present and those that are remote, to make sure you create safety by getting people to participate in a variety of different roles in meetings. So we all have these different roles. And then it's actually very helpful to have a producer or a facilitator of remote team meetings. Someone's kind of in charge of how the meeting runs and how effectively it goes. So having that person in that role is going to be critical. All right. So I told you I wanted to save a little time near the end to talk about different generations at work and how they're kind of embracing or not these new tools that are coming online in a new area of remote and hybrid working. I have time to talk about all 5 generations, even though we do currently have all 5 generations in the workplace. We've got the veterans, we've got the boomers, we got Gen X, my generation, and then we have Y, and now we have Z as well coming online. So I'm going to talk just a moment about Y and Z, some of the things that they're bringing to the table in terms of their workplace. So I'll start with their characteristics. I cannot believe that millennials could be 43 years old. I have lost something. I don't know, maybe it's COVID, but I'm like, millennials, the young millennials can be 43 years old. That's still young, by the way, just saying, but I was shocked to see that number. So these people that are born between 1980 and 1996. So what are the typical characteristics of millennials that we know about? Well, the Gen Xers are often considered kind of the forgotten generation because it was a very small generation sandwiched between the very large boomer generation and the very large millennial generation. So if the Xers are kind of the forgotten generation, the millennials are the most wanted. They're actually children of the most age diverse group of parents ever. So over time, we've seen people have kids later and later in life. And so millennials were that first group that had a very age diverse set of parents. They're also known as the self-esteem generation, which always makes me kind of laugh. But, you know, when millennials came along, we really focused on self-esteem, feeling good about yourself, feeling positive, lots of rewards, lots of ribbons, lots of trophies. Very important that people feel good about themselves. And it turns out that's actually a good thing because self-esteem is linked to a lot of things that we care about in organizations like satisfaction, productivity, even things like absenteeism and turnover. Self-esteem is a good thing, but it was really the first generation where we really focused on self-esteem. Some would say too much. Maybe that's true as well, but self-esteem was very important. They're kind of combining different attitudes of previous generations, the can-do spirit of the veterans, the teamwork ethic of the boomers, and the tech savvy of the Gen Xers. Millennials very committed to higher education. About half plan to enter college right after high school. They hope to work side by side with other idealistic, committed coworkers. It's a very resilient generation. They've seen a lot of stuff in their formative years. It's made them very resilient. It's the first generation to be interested in climate change, rainforest, recycling. Before, there wasn't a lot of interest in that. Now there's a lot of interest in the environment. Gen Z is certainly taking that to the next level, for sure. I love this one. 90% of those surveyed in 2001 already had specific goals for the next 5 years and the confidence they would achieve them. Wow, who are you? That's amazing. Good for you. The work ethic resembles the veterans. They value collective action, trust in a social authority, heroic spirit. In the chat, can you put examples of movies? I'm a movie guy, so I always think in terms of movies, but can you put examples of movies that might capture the kind of the spirit of the millennial generation? I went to the internet to find these, so I'll show you what the internet said, but can you think of any movies that capture like who millennials are, what they're about? Oh, Goonies, I like that one. That's a good one, Morgan. Goonies, yeah. Princess Bride is a good one. Sasha. Goonies, what a great film. What else? I always find it difficult to talk about my own movies. Like, get that question about Gen X. I'm like, I don't know. Oh, Breakfast Club is good. Danny says either there's a movie called Question Mark or he doesn't know. Tommy Boy, interesting. I'll show you what the internet told me. You be the judge. The Social Network, which I guess is a movie about Facebook and Zuckerberg, how that kind of came to fruition. American Pie, a little bit of an irreverent kind of film there. Juno came up. Anything with involving the Matrix movies. What about a millennial thing? Anything with Harry Potter, the books and the movies. Tiny Furniture, I don't know that one. I think they said it was Lena Dunham who did Girls for HBO, kind of a millennial voice there. Lost in Translation. Mean Girls, that one comes up quite a bit. And Garden State, I think it's Zach Braff. So those are the kind of the characteristics. Something else that I found interesting to me was a table I found that suggested, and I'll let you read most of these later, but how millennials would like to operate when they're working, and how most corporations today actually work. So it's two columns there, how millennials want to work and how corporations actually work. And when you go down the two columns, you see they're exactly the opposite. So millennials want things that corporations don't actually traditionally offer. They're changing, but they don't actually. So there's a mismatch or a disconnect between how millennials want to work and how most corporations actually work. There's this table goes on, the second part of the table still, again, looks very, very opposite to what they're looking for. And I always ask my groups when I'm talking about generations and generational differences, which generation designed the modern American corporation? Which generations were responsible for how corporations work, how they're structured, how they look, how they feel, how they're designed? What generations were responsible for designing the modern American corporation? Yeah, Leah says definitely boomers for sure. And also veterans, right? So you're talking about veterans and boomers were kind of sort of responsible for designing what a corporation looks like, feels like, how it's structured. So you've got an actual structure designed by two generations behind millennials and Gen Z. And now we're scratching our heads wondering why we can't retain our millennials and our Gen Z employees. Why is there so much turnover in our corporations? Well, one explanation is you've designed a way of working that is way out of touch with what millennials and Gen Z are actually looking for in their work environment. So we're seeing this change slowly, but it is changing. And then I asked the question, what would an office building designed by a millennial look like? Like, would it look like traditional office setting, or would it be something different? Fortunately, we have an example. This is a picture from Facebook, or now Meta's headquarters, designed by, of course, Mark Zuckerberg and his team. It turns out it's the largest open office workspace in the entire world. That's a company, a corporation designed by a millennial. As a Gen Xer, that freaks me out. I look at that and I'm like, I do not want to work in that kind of chaos. That just looks like it's totally disorganized. But again, designed for innovation, creativity, that kind of thing. Yeah, you got to be an extrovert millennial. That's right. You better be an extrovert millennial, because it's not gonna work. What I notice when I walk through spaces like this, everyone has headphones on. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. So I found some other pictures of other corporate headquarters and different. I mean, this looks like some kind of Disney park here. This is actually a park literally built on top of a building. So they put a green space on top of an actual office building. So again, really a lot of new stuff kind of happening there with the way millennials want to work versus the way corporations actually work and look and feel. So one question would be, well, if I'm going to work to retain my millennial employees, how would I do it? Based on their values. You want to allow them time to orient to their job, clarify expectations to the extent possible, create a clear picture of what the work environment is going to be. They are actually great team players. Millennials grew up with nothing but teamwork. And they also don't mind leadership. They like leadership. My generation was like, don't lead me. Let me figure it out on my own. Tell me what the goal is and I'll get there. Millennials are more like, leadership is fine. Don't mind having a strong leader to follow. Respect talent. It's not going to come in traditional packages, right? There's more diversity in terms of people, how they look, how they dress. Tell them how they fit in to the big picture from their perspective. Give them a sense of belongingness. Millennials like that aspect of teamwork, belonging. Put them on a project or a task force outside of their job description, right? So people sometimes get bored with whatever they're supposed to do in their job. So put them on a task force outside of their job to kind of create more meaning in their work. Constant feedback. These folks got a lot of feedback growing up, right? A lot of information about how they're doing and training and development. Downplay formal ceremonies, not into it. Only hold meetings when there's something to talk about. And the choice of rewards is going to be important for millennials as well. So that's millennials. And measurement, right? They were raised with structure and measure. So measurement is going to be key. So let's talk about Gen Z as we close out. And you would think that the millennials and Gen Z would be very similar because they're two generations like right next to one another. But there are some key fundamental differences between millennials and Gen Z that are going to be important, especially as you're working in teams and especially as you're working in remote and hybrid teams. So Gen Z folks will be born between 1987 and 2012. The youngest would be 11. The oldest is 26. So if we're talking about college age people or college people who went to college, the Gen Z would have been in the workforce for a maximum of about 4 years. However, some are skipping college, so it could be 8 years, depending on whether they went to college or not. So we're still learning a lot about Gen Z and what they want in the workplace. So I would say take this information with a grain of salt. This is what we know so far, but we're only 4 years in. That's like not a lot of time. So some of this is kind of speculation, but some of it's kind of based in the data as well. So I'll show you what we found so far. One thing we know different from millennials is they're motivated more by security, about feeling safe and secure, because they were kids during the Great Recession. And so they share some values with people from the Great Depression. So they have some of those similar values. They want and seek out security because, again, the Great Recession was very disruptive. They're pragmatic, as they should be. If they're motivated by security, they're going to be pragmatic. And a lot of them are in debt, right? We know this is a problem. I think North Carolina and Texas state schools still have some of the cheapest tuition in the nation. And it's on purpose, right? We're trying to keep our college tuition and things as cheap as it can be. Still expensive, not going to debate that, but relative to other states, North Carolina and Texas have done a relatively good job of trying to keep those costs down. The UNC system has talked about free tuition just recently, so that's something. This is also different from millennials. Gen Z, more competitive. They want to be judged on their own merit rather than their teams. So millennials were taught that everyone wins, you're all awesome, you're all going to get a trophy, you're all special. And Gen Z parents have said that's actually not true. They're going to be winners and losers, so you have to stand out. You need to stick out from your team. They are more independent. They want to manage their own projects so they can shine. So there's some question about how that jives with teamwork. Are they going to be great team players or more individualistic? I don't think we know that yet. Some, as we said, are skipping higher education to avoid debt. They multitask. Gen Z is way more multitasking than the millennials. They have less separation of work and home because, again, we're in this kind of remote hybrid period. So they don't, there's not a clear delineation between work and home. They're more entrepreneurial than millennials. 55% more likely to want to start a business than millennials. That's quite different. They prefer face-to-face communication. If millennials were known for texting and not wanting to interact face-to-face, Gen Z is actually quite comfortable with face-to-face and Zoom, the things they've been raised on in terms of communication. So they use these richer tools. They're digital natives, of course. They grew up in a digital world from the time they were babies till now. They expect the workplace to conform to them, something employers need to be aware of, that they really expect workplaces to conform to them. On the downside, we know that they're more likely to suffer from mental health issues. It's been reported in the news, and you've seen the statistics. Depression and anxiety are much higher in this generation than the generation before it. And this is interesting for us, people like me who train leaders. About 2/3 of US Gen Z and about almost 90% worldwide say stress prevents them from becoming leaders, which is something we'll have to grapple with as we try to develop leaders for our companies. And lastly, it's the least likely of all the generations to have worked when they were younger. So in 1979, 60% of teens had a job. In 2015, it was 34%. And by 2024, they're estimated to be 25%. So here's another challenge for employers is we're asking people who haven't worked basically at all. They might have had an internship here and there, but they didn't work summer jobs like most of us did. And so that will be a challenge for employers really going forward too. Can anybody think of any movies for Gen Z? Can I think of any movies that would kind of sum up Gen Z? I struggle with this one. I did not come up with much. So those that are kind of between 11 and 26, would there be any movies that you can think of? Yeah, you struggled like me. Well, here's what the internet said. It said High School Musical was a big one that kept coming up repeatedly. The Hunger Games, any kind of movie that has like a person rising above a dystopian future and saving the world for benefit. Anything animated, and then anything on Netflix. So it's almost like, we're moving past movies in some ways. So what do we know about Gen Z? What does Gen Z want at work? What do they want from their workplace? And again, this is a little bit speculative because they've only been in the workplace for about 4 years, but here's what we know. They're looking for the best cultural fit for them and their workplace. They want to work for a company where they're not just a number, but are in a position and a place to make some kind of significant contribution. That makes sense based on their values. The number one things they look for is a fun place to work with a flexible schedule and paid time off. Good luck with that. It's a little bit tricky, that one. They don't necessarily want to climb the ranks quickly. That makes sense, right? Because they said they were a little bit more leery about being leaders, to be thrown into leadership roles too quickly. So they don't see as climbing the ranks quickly as something that the millennials did. Millennials want to move up very quickly. They want to be socially connected to everyone on their devices. That makes sense, including their boss. Just be able to text their boss, call their boss, connect with their boss any time of the day or night. They seek constant feedback, maybe even more so than we saw with millennials. And they expect to be offered internal growth opportunities and development. If they don't get that, they're going to leave. So that's something that really is important for Gen Z, to get those internal growth and development opportunities. What do they want in a boss? What do they want their boss to be like? So this is what's been reported from Gen Z. They want a strong and effective communicator. They want someone who drives a positive and inclusive culture. They want someone who has a high EQ or emotional intelligence. Somebody who provides ongoing, consistent mentorship. People that have an involved and engaging personality. They're competent. They promote equality in their teams. They exhibit transformational leadership, not transactional, right? Rewards and punishments type stuff. And they're friendly and open-minded. And almost 80% would prefer to have a millennial manager rather than Gen X or baby boomer. So they want leaders that are close to them in their generation rather than farther away from them in their generation. When I saw this list for the first time, I thought, I'd like that boss too. So I'm not quite sure why anyone would not want this boss. I guess what they're saying is Gen Z wants much more of this than previous generations. That just looks like a really good boss to me. And the last couple of things I'll share with you as we're getting ready to wrap up, there was a study done in 2018 by Deloitte and the Network of Executive Women, and they had some kind of thoughts and opinions about Gen Z that they weren't sure were true or not, kind of myth fact. And so I'll show you what they found. That some of the things they thought were true were, some of the things they thought were true were not. So one, Gen Z prefers to work in industries that they interact with in their personal lives, opposed to industries that they aren't frequent consumers of. That was true. They want to work for industries that they have a personal connection to and that they buy from. They desire diverse and entrepreneurial opportunities with the safety of stable employment, and they'll stay loyal to a company if they can offer that. So they want entrepreneurship, but they also want stable employment. That's kind of things that go hand in hand there. Again, going along with their need for security and pragmatism. They prefer individual tasks over team-based activities, but they do value the physical connection, right? They're not people that want to hide and not interact physically. They prefer independence, not isolation. That was also true. They no longer form opinions about a company solely based on the quality of their products or services, but now on the company's ethics, their practices, and their social impact. That was true. We have several faculty at Poole who are in marketing that have studied the buying habits of Gen Z, and that backs that up completely. What they're finding is exactly the same thing. Gen Z is not just looking at quality of products, they're looking at what the company stands for, what its social impact is. That's a big difference from millennials. They'll prioritize financial security over personal fulfillment. Well, again, pragmatic. They're reevaluating the costs and benefits of traditional education, given the dramatic rise in educational expenses. That was determined to be false. They did not find that was true. They seek out learning opportunities to enhance their skills and prefer to learn independently via online platforms. Also not true, because we thought for a while that they were only going to be really seeking out online kind of tutorials. Some of them might like that, but it wasn't really a predominant thing. They still like the face-to-face learning environment that we value as well. And their attachment to social media will pose implications about how they interact and want to be perceived. Yeah, I think we know that one's true. And they also define diversity along different lines than generations before them. So when they think about diversity, they think about it differently than previous generations. It's a much broader concept to them. So how do you motivate and retain Gen Z? And I'll wrap here. Try to emphasize job security, obviously, future salary increases. Make sure they know they'll receive constant skill development to stay relevant. Earning badges, experiential rewards are key. They prefer more private workspaces. They're not as into the cube farms as previous generations. Allow for and promote multitasking. So if you see a Gen Z doing something on the phone and listening to something else, that's just natural for them, right? They can engage and re-engage constantly. I would definitely recommend allowing their entrepreneurship to flourish. We call it intrapreneurship when it occurs inside a corporation, giving them ownership over what they're doing. Engaging in regular face-to-face meetings is important, more important for them than millennials. 53% of Gen Z prefer face-to-face communication. New technology tools for work and projects, obviously, can't be slow. They were raised on that. Flex time, even more important for Gen Z compared to millennials. So having that flexibility is going to be really critical. Emphasizing the importance of diversity, obviously we talk about that, and a global view is also going to be critical. So that is what I have for you in terms of working remotely in a hybrid format, and then a little bit of stuff on what we know about millennials and Gen Z in these new environments. And I think I'm going to turn it back over to Jessica to wrap us up.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brad. I'm going to put in, just for the sake of time, I'm going to put in the chat, the survey for your response. And then the next link is going to be to the slides. So you'll have those as well. It's going to take me a minute to get that. Just a second to get that link. But in the meantime, are there any questions for the last 2 minutes? But if you need to go, otherwise, you've fulfilled your 15 minutes and answered your polling questions from a CPE perspective, you're welcome to go. But if there's questions, I think Brad would be open to those in our last 2 minutes.
Absolutely.
If you have a question, please drop it in or raise your hand. Greg, we understand people like to linger behind. I was paying attention to you. So we can linger behind after this for those people that
we don't do that. We don't do that. We typically hit the button and that's it. It's over. And you know, we shouldn't do that.
You may have any quick questions I'd like to ask. Just
someone said, Jenny says the survey is not working, or at least the link's not working. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Kathy.
Hey, Brad, question I had when you talked about mentoring and coaching.
Yes.
Model, how do you do that in this remote model? You mentioned it, but you didn't say how to do it.
Yeah, I think the important thing to note there is you have to formally schedule mentoring and coaching sessions, right? When you're in the office, you can walk down the hall, and I was a department head for 8 years. I would walk down the hall and I would go in somebody's office and I'd sit down and say, hey, you got 5 minutes? Here's some feedback I want to give you about something I saw in a meeting kind of thing, right? I could do that anytime. And it's really, really easy to do it. It's not scheduled, right? I don't have to book an appointment with somebody in the office to give them coaching or feedback. They're right there. But in a virtual environment or remote environment, you have to book it or it won't happen. So you've got to say, hey, even call it a mentoring session, call it a coaching session, call it whatever you want, but you have to plan it in advance to make sure that it actually happens. I think that's the biggest difference. How you're coaching and the information you're giving aren't that different in a face-to-face versus a remote environment. It's more about how you get opportunities to do that coaching and feedback that'll be quite different. It can't be this bumping into each other. And I said earlier that, creativity and innovation actually aren't harmed by remote working because there's some flaws to face-to-face working. What I didn't say is that the water cooler chats and the bumping into each other accidentally and saying to someone, hey, you had that problem last week where you had the thing with how did you handle that? I'd like to know. That is lost in a virtual environment because we're not bumping into each other. We're not really having those. So that is really tough. I don't know the answer for that in terms of how to recreate water cooler interactions. That one's a tough one. But yeah, I would say scheduling your coaching and mentoring is going to be key.
Anybody else have any questions? Last minute questions. Let people linger if they wish. What do you feel about starting meetings on time remotely versus not? You know, notice I see people this last minute thing, which may often makes them late. So what's your feeling about starting Zoom meetings on time?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in starting all meetings on time, regardless of, because if you give a 5-minute buffer in a remote setting, then I know I can be 5 minutes late.
Mhm.
So I'll just sort of factor that into my scheduling. Whereas if I know that I'm going to miss perhaps the kickoff of the meeting, again, I think starting in a punctual manner, that varies by culture, because we didn't talk about culture today, but you go to different countries, meetings start way different times than they do in the West. In the West, we tend to start a little early or on time at the latest, but in a lot of cultures, we know that the person says the meeting's at 1:00, but it's really 1:30. But in the West, we tend to be more prompt and sort of more time focused. But I think starting them on time would be key in a remote setting. I noticed in a lot of meetings, though, you've probably seen this too remotely, that people say, well, not everyone's here yet. Let's wait a few more minutes. We'll see if anybody drops in. It's like, don't do that. Just start.
Drives me crazy. You had badges on one of your slides.
Yes.
I don't quite understand those. I understand what badges are. Are they really the motivators that people say they are?
Yeah, I think for this generation, not taking an entire course, not going to school for an entire semester, just to be able to get us to learn a skill, develop a skill, and then get something for it, to be able to show on LinkedIn or show on your resume that you've got these badges, these certifications. Because a lot of companies are valuing those as well and saying that, a degree is one thing. Love it. Typically, it's required for a lot of jobs. I love the 4-year degree, but people are now saying, well, is that it? Is that what, we have lifelong learning, as you guys are doing right now. We have Vilma, who's our, associate director for exec ed and lifelong learning. And I think those badges and those certifications kind of fit that model very well, that your education shouldn't stop at an undergraduate degree or a master's degree. And that's it. That's all you're ever going to learn again. You're never going to go back to school. So NC State and other universities should be a place where we can consistently and constantly develop your skill sets over time, right? You never stop learning. And why shouldn't a place like NC State be a format for which you do some of that learning? I think is critical. So Vilma plays that role in terms of having that lifelong learning piece. It was done intentionally, right, Vilma, to have that as part of your role.
Brad, you do have one question in chat.
Nope.
Leah would like to know, do you have any suggestions on how to approach this information with current leadership who may not be interested?
Interesting. I meant to tell the group at the beginning that this is a pretty quick overview of these subject matters. And maybe you send it, Jessica, you can send it out to them, that maybe you send them my email address, because we oftentimes will go do longer versions of these things in company settings. So we have 2-hour, we have 4-hour, we have full days on this stuff. So it could be a matter of saying, hey, I saw an interesting speaker at one of my lifelong learning sessions. I wonder if you'd be interested in having this person come in and talk about these things. Because again, for leaders who aren't interested, they have to be convinced that this stuff matters. So you can send me email. I'll send you a couple of articles about generations in the workplace and how they affect productivity and satisfaction, and hopefully showing them the business case. If a leader is not interested in this stuff, just intellectually interested, like, yeah, that generational stuff kind of bores me. If you go back and say, well, it might bore you, but it has an impact on the bottom line. We've got the studies to show that if you don't pay attention to these differences, you could actually end up losing a lot of employees, having them turn over a lot. So one of the biggest arguments you can use right off the bat is, how successful has this company been retaining millennials and Gen Z? And almost everyone will say, not very successful. Well, do you want to know more about why that is? Sure. I'd love to know why we can't retain our Gen Z and millennials. So maybe go in with that angle, sort of a, bottom line kind of approach. Great question, Leah. That's a really good question.
The other question. By the way, while you were chatting, I found my hide self-view button. So thank you for that tip.
You found it. Yeah, it's in there. It's right there.
I didn't know it was there. I now found it. Right.
Yeah, and then the reverse is show self-view. So I hid myself in this meeting. Now I can show myself. Oh no, see, no. I'm not. I'm hide self-view. I'm 100%.
I have a question.
Yes, and Johnny.
Um, how would you motivate boomers in a virtual environment? Because my team is primarily older people, and I find that they have a harder time adjusting to the virtual environment, and also a lack of excitement for social events.
Interesting. The stereotype is that the boomers would have the hardest time adjusting, boomers and veterans, because they weren't raised in these environments where any of this was natural for them. They were only raised in face-to-face environments. For me, being a Gen Xer, all this stuff kind of happened, during my time. Kind of, PCs came on the scene and the internet arrived, and so we kind of had both worlds, kind of the analog world and the digital world. But for boomers and veterans, again, just trying to show them that, these tools are there for a reason. They actually can enhance productivity and satisfaction, given some of the quotes and some of the statistics we had earlier that showed that hybrid working and remote working can actually increase people's productivity, not decrease them. Making the business case for them is important as well. As far as social stuff, I guess for them being in a different life stage, they're just like, do I really need to go to this social? Do I really need to go to this reception? I don't think there's any way you can make them go or force them to go. They like to be recognized. Boomers are the star of the show. They're never going to retire. They're going to be working forever. They're going to live forever. So if you could roll in some sort of recognition or something that would get them attention or name dropping, they like that. So, make part of your social event a ceremony to give out, spot awards or, things of that, where they can be recognized. They love to be recognized. That's a big deal for them. So making sure there's something in it for them. Like they'll say, what's in it for me to go to this social event? Whereas younger generations are like, because it's a social event. That's what's in it for you. I like to socialize, but they may be less likely to do so, again, because of the life cycle, the life stage they're in. They're just, 30 years ago I would have done it, but now I'm not so interested. So what's in it? I kept to answer the what's in it for them question.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Any final questions for Brad? We want to let you get some rest. Thank you very much. Very much appreciated for your comments.
Absolutely.
And anybody feel free to reach out to Brad. I'm sure
yeah, for sure.
And we will send you the slides and thank you very much, Brad.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Enjoyed it.